Okay, this is my attempt to make a rather confusing and boring topic a little more interesting, particularly as it pertains to our new school project in Willington. Just to begin, quite simple. I'm doing this on my own, based on publicly available documents. This is not a propaganda piece. This is intended to be a fact piece. The property tax information that's been published by the SBC only provides additional tax burden associated with the school project. And many people are concerned that this does not include other government costs, which of course it does not. The goal of a spreadsheet that I created was to provide a tool to model numerous what-if scenarios so that the total tax impact can be estimated. Long-term debt, combined with our usual government expenses, will have or can have an adverse effect on taxpayers. Obviously, it has to get paid back. Evaluating these effects requires that common sense assumptions be made. Judging a school project's effects isolated from other town costs does not provide a complete picture. The details may be considered complicated, but when simplified, they can provide a reasonable estimate. Variability year to year is to be expected. Nonetheless, using historic trends as a basis for my assumptions, a reasonable future impact can emerge. So, given my awareness of the details, I wanted to determine how this project's financials would affect our town's budget and share that information with those who are going to have to pay the tab. We know that the SBC tax calculator that's online is very limited. It determines only the school project impact. It does not calculate the combined burden of government, education, and debt. Further, it does not reflect the annual growth in the town's budget. The average annual growth from 2011 to 2022 is approximately 1.86 per year, 1.86% per year, sorry. Next year's proposed budget could grow approximately 4%, although that's not yet been finalized. Further, the online calculator misses future capital improvement program committee requests and obligations. For example, our fire departments are suggesting $11.5 million for a new firehouse. The funding for engineering and design is being considered, although that may not yet have been committed. My spreadsheet was constructed such that it can model the effects of annual town budget growth, anomalies in the town budget growth, future expected budget adjustments, additional debt service beyond the school project, changes in the town's grant list, which, by the way, directly affects mill rate. The algorithms I've used have been compared to the online calculator provided by the SBC. The results are identical when the same parameters are used. For reference, the online tax calculator can be found at this address. Okay, so the school project that will be presented to referendum is this. A site on Glass Factory School Road of approximately 65 acres, about which approximately 20 acres will be cleared for the school, the fields, and the parking. If an auditorium is added, it goes in the very south corner. This is why there's a second question on the referendum. Okay, let's look at costs. simple table provided by the SBC. Note that the column in the middle, estimated reimbursement, I just want to emphasize the word estimated. We won't know until such time that a grant is approved. The remaining cost that you see in the far right column is what we'll be paying via bond construction notes and the like. Those numbers do not include bond interest. For a town of our size and our budget, these costs are significant. As I said, previous slide did not include financing cost. We will be applying for a state grant. In order to submit a grant application, the taxpayers must endorse this investment by referendum. What the grant funding does not cover will, of course, be put on our credit card. Construction notes, also known as loans, during construction. Both the notes and the bonds have issuance costs, which are not spelled out. And the end result is bonding over 20 years upon completion of the project. So let's look at costs. If we just do the school without an auditorium, estimated project cost at this point is $60.7 million. The taxpayer's share will vary depending upon how successful we are at achieving waivers, which influence the reimbursement. So taxpayers will be footing the bill for 36.2 to as low as 28.7 million. Along with 20 years of bond interest that totals between 23.5 down to 19.1 million. Now, if we go with the auditorium, project cost, of course, increases to 66.6 million. Taxpayer share will run from a high of 43.4 million down to a low of 34.7 million. 20 years of bond interest will total somewhere between 28 million at the high end to 22.7 million at the low end. The highest taxpayer share assumes that we are not granted a space waiver by the state when our reimbursement rate is considered. So, given the way my spreadsheet was set up, I generated the following tables. Please pay careful attention to the costing options listed on the left side. The favored approach with an auditorium, of course, would be the bottom line here. At bond issuance, we'd see a jump to almost 40 mils for taxes, increasing over time to a final mill rate of 49.17. Again, these are estimates. Please don't take them as gospel because things change over time that no one can predict. My methodology is just as valid as anyone else's. Another option, the school only. Again, bottom line is the one we're hoping for. It's still a substantial mill rate increase. I just picked 4 out of the 20 plus years that my spreadsheet can calculate. I didn't want to put up a blinding full page of year by year numbers. It just makes it more confusing. And if the fire department gets their hope, I roughed out the debt service on an $11.5 million fire department bond. And you can see that in future years, the mill rate really kind of goes out of sight. The 2 columns, no waiver and no cost savings, or no waiver with cost savings, etc., all refer to the school project only, not to the fire department bond. And lastly, a school with an auditorium, but considering a bond for the fire department, you can see that the mill rates can get as high as almost 53 mills in 2046. Not all of us will be here at that time, but it should be a concern of the younger homeowners. So the parameters that I used when the previous tables were generated. An annual budget growth of 1.86% per year, which is our historical trend. Anomalies in town budget growth. For example, I'm using 4%. In our next fiscal year, I expect that number may be trimmed, or it may be higher to start to bank away money for the first year bond payment in 2027. I did accommodate the change in the town's grant list from 2021 to 2022. And some of those tables include an allowance for the expected education cost savings, which has yet to be finalized. And then, of course, additional debt service was considered specifically for a fire department bond. Now, the spreadsheet can spit out or print, however you want to refer to it, a projection of the mill rate, little example on the right. The full spreadsheet actually goes to 2048, I believe. This is, like I said, this is just a portion. And the following slide will indicate the progression a little bit better. This is just plotting the mill rate growth over the bond's life. And you see it ramping up as we move from 2023 to first year bond payment in 2027. The gradual upward trend is a consequence of annual budget growth. The final bond payment in 2046 is where it dips down, but it never returns down to our current mill rate, simply because the expectation is that town budget will grow year to year. It may not grow a lot, but it will grow. This particular plot assumes a school without an auditorium, no $500,000 annual operations savings in the school, and no fire department bond is included. The general progression is similar when those items are included. I didn't want to project an extreme value at this point because we don't know where the fire department is going. And realistically, there's no such thing as a foolproof, guaranteed financial analysis. This model is not precise. As I mentioned previously, factors change, and consequently, so does the end result. But potential future trends do require serious consideration. A 20-year debt obligation that we anticipate assuming requires a bit more than just a year or two look ahead. The town really needs to complete a comprehensive form of longer-term analysis so that we can better plan for future needs and their financial impact. The spreadsheet does provide future property tax liability as various assumptions are tested. That would be this portion of the spreadsheet. The numbers you see are for a $100,000 property assessed value. And you can see the progression over time. Minimal increase, obviously, between 2023 2024, because we're just looking at a slight bump in grand list, which really doesn't affect taxes to any great degree, but it does reflect a jump in the budget of 4%. And as I stated, the tweak, the adjusted assessment value is related to the increase in the grand list. While I did include Love's contribution to the grand list, now that it's been completed, I haven't properly isolated it yet, although quite frankly the difference once those numbers are refined a little bit will be really minute in the big picture. So, how's this going to affect our town budget? Certainly, beginning in 2027, we're looking at the possibility of annual bond payments in the neighborhood of $3 to $4 million. The bond we're taking out is almost, depending on space waivers, grant values, percentage of reimbursement, and which project ultimately gets built, it pushes the limits of our Moody's rating on debt limit for a school project. As I said, annual bond payments could run from $3 million to $4.8 million. Again, the actual amount depends on space waivers, which influence state reimbursement. We, of course, don't know today what the bond interest rate will be when the bond is issued. And of course, the way we're financing this, it's like a typical mortgage. As years go by, the annual debt service slowly decreases. But there's no one who can sit here today and guarantee that our total government spending will remain stagnant. Just for those who care and want to get into local budget determination, I want to run through a simple analysis. We take money in, also known as revenue, of about $4 million a year. This is money that does not come from taxpayers. This is in the form of state contributions, fees, etc. Money out, it's a little clearer. Our central government budget of $5.4 million, total education budget of $13.5 million, transfers into reserve accounts, and then money out less money in equals the taxpayer burden, about $15 million. Sometimes the Board of Finance will try to soften the impact of the taxpayer burden by utilizing reserve funds to lower the taxpayer burden. Your particular tax burden, of course, the mill rate's determined by dividing the taxpayer burden, i.e. the total amount of revenue to be raised by taxation, by the grand list value, which results in $15 million in taxpayer burden divided by 483 million grand list gives us 0.03106, and that's typically multiplied by 1,000 to give a mill rate of 31.06 mils. A little bit less than what we currently are at, but again, this is just an estimation of the process. Your total property assessed value divided by 1,000 times 31.06 equals your tax bill. Now, another thing that's not yet considered in this spreadsheet, Connecticut state statutes limit motor vehicle tax rate to 32.46 mils. When our overall mill rate exceeds 32.46, then the motor vehicle grand list will have to be separated from the total grand list. Like I said, that's not yet been worked into this spreadsheet. So again, what my spreadsheet does provides an estimate of future mill rates and tax obligation based on property assessment. Like with any financial model, parameter assumptions are necessary. Things like government spending growth or reduction in percent, operational expense reductions, in this case for this spreadsheet in dollars, evaluation of future debt service for other possible big ticket or bonded items, an increase in the total grand list. One example would be reval. More importantly, an expansion of the total grand list, which in my mind is defined as new development not previously included in the grand list. That provides additional revenue towards government operations, which is helpful to the average residential homeowner. And again, my point is this spreadsheet can be a useful tool when looking at the capital improvements plans' effect on future years' budget. Some final thoughts. An obvious strategy that would help our town as a whole to foster expansion of the grand list by non-residential development. And we've learned that this is a tough thing for our town's residents to accept, but the effective increase in the grand list is going to be non-residential development of an assessed value of say 20 million or more. While small scale business growth helps, it does not make a significant dent in helping us with debt service. And of course, our warehouse experience, we know that was not a favored option to help expand the grand list. And then the other consideration here is that vacant town-owned or town-abandoned properties will generate costs simply because of the need to prevent them from deteriorating. Nowhere in this are any wish lists for public works projects. Ideally, Public Works would like to see consistently about $800,000 to $1 million annually for street and stormwater repairs and improvements. And my final comments. It's easy to determine what your property tax bill might be. Go to this online website. You can search for your property by either owner name or by address. Looking at the assessed value, not the appraised value, divide that number by 100 and then multiply by the mill rate. That's your tax liability. It doesn't include motor vehicles, so keep that in mind. When you go to referendum, you have to judge your vote based on what you feel you can afford. This presentation is simply an examination of how government expenditures translate into increased taxes. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I will respond as appropriate. And thank you for your attention. If you've made it this far, congratulations. If you're snoring, well, I can understand that too. This is not an easy topic to address. And that is the end of my presentation.